All righty, welcome to the Dan Dawson Show podcast. Today, my special guest, Dr. Fax. So, we were talking earlier about the defunding of police across the nation, which I think, honestly, is just going to be horrific. Horrific. There's not, I was looking at, you see today, the Seattle police chief, Carmen Best, resigned. One of the few Black female police chiefs in the nation. I also noticed that the police chief of Oregon is a Black man. They're showing up at these Black people's houses to riot and protest. To me, that's just, we're headed into lawlessness. So if you don't know, me and Dr. Fax are both preppers. We knew this day was coming. Because it reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger in that last Terminator movie, where he goes, "Oh, I calculated the probability of society falling into chaos at 73%, where he takes him into the shed and he has all the guns." And she was like, "You just have this many guns." Well, even without AI interference, I calculated the probability of society falling into chaos, and these guns will be beneficial for me to take care of my family. He goes, and also it's Texas. So I thought that was pretty funny. But what's going on right now in the nation is not funny. If you're out there rioting and supporting Black Lives Matter, do me a favor. Don't even call into the show. Rest up from your rioting, so when you go to jail and catch these federal charges, you can go well rested. What is your take on it, Dr. Fax?
Well, I think that we're seeing is a rethinking of law and order in America, and what I hear that they're planning on doing is sending social workers and quote unquote mental health specialists and all these people to deal with low-level crimes and mentally ill people acting up on the street. And I think if they see any success with that, it's going to be very limited, and you're going to see a lot of things go haywire. One thing that I think is interesting is that once people get the sense that it's not safe out there anymore, I think what we're going to see is a return to the Old West as far as people joining militias, a return of the neighborhood watch.
Well, I agree with that. And
I think what you're going to start to see is entire neighborhoods being patrolled by armed citizens who, in the absence of a clear law enforcement, they're going to start to take matters in their own hands. And what you're going to start to see is a lot of mob justice to crimes perpetrated in their neighborhoods. You're going to see a lot of roving patrols, and you're going to have, I think, curfews as far as who's allowed to enter neighborhoods after a certain hour. And, this might not be politically correct, but I think you're going to start to see a rise in people being kicked out of neighborhoods after a certain hour for not belonging. It's like, if you don't belong here in this neighborhood, you got to get out.
I agree with that. That sentiment is so true. And remember, here on our show, we don't worry about political correctness. Political correctness is the enemy of truth. Truth is not always politically correct. Very rarely is it politically correct, because when you do politically correct stuff, you tend to soften what you're saying. So just feel free to run with it. But no, I agree with you. And that's, if you'll actually look, here last weekend when the rioters, because I won't call them protesters, they're not protesters, they're rioters, showed up at Chief Best's house. One of her neighbors pulled out his F-350 to block them off. And a few more neighbors came out with their rifles and were like, "Hey, go somewhere else." And you can see them, they're like, "Oh no, we're just peacefully protesting." And they were like, "Yeah, cool. Go peacefully protest somewhere else. We don't want you here."
Right.
So I think what you're seeing is going to happen, is already starting to happen in some neighborhoods, especially where you see this rioting. because I was looking at the whole Portland riots. Of course, last night another riot, but now they're moving into urban neighborhoods. Uh, there was a video, an article, I saw it on YouTube, and they're harassing these two old women who were just trying to put out a fire that the protesters started in their neighborhood. So to what you were saying, how long before, now you're harassing these two old women? How long before, because don't think these women live in a vacuum.
Right.
So how long before their sons show up, their husbands come out, their nephews show up armed? And what I'm noticing now is a trend. More and more women are becoming armed. When I go to the range, it used to be you'd see one or two women at the range. No, now over half the range is women. So what you're saying is correct. We are headed well towards that.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a rise in vigilantism, and you can kind of see that, in a lot of the border states where the border patrol is stretched thin. You have armed citizens who take it upon themselves to shore up the border defenses, because they recognize that and the border control can't watch all the areas at once, and so they fill in that vacuum. Nature hates a vacuum. So in the absence of one thing, you're going to have people reconstituting in a different way. So if you defund the police, I believe, because it's human nature, people don't like to see lawlessness in their neighborhoods. You're going to see people taking the law into their own hands increasingly. Over, I mean, if these measures are incorporated, you're going to see a whole lot more of people taking the law into their own hands on a mass scale, on a neighborhood scale, on a citywide scale, depending on, how big that police department was.
And so I think you're right. That's what's about to happen. Like I said, it's already started happening. But what happens when you get to the point to where now you have your average everyday citizen who can't get to their car, who can't go grocery shopping? So that's going to, like you said, that's going to be a fallout. And you look in Seattle, it's already starting to happen. In Portland, it's already starting to happen. And these are the bastions of
Even Georgia, well, Dan,
Say again?
even if you remember the Atlanta Police Department, they stopped responding to calls because of these protests, and they said they're right. They're only going to respond to calls of officers being injured. Anything else, they basically said you're on your own. If you don't want us, figure it out on your own.
Well, yeah, and I don't blame the police. I have my nephew is going to school to be a cop. He's almost got his bachelor's. I think he's only one quarter away. One of the old lady's cousins is a cop down in Florida. No, and I feel for those guys. I wouldn't want to do that job. I would not want to do that job. And the funny thing is, I was watching, because they just had the big explosion in Beirut.
Right.
And I'm watching the riots, and I walked in without context. I just walked into the living room, and the riots are on TV. And I honestly couldn't tell if it was downtown Seattle or downtown Portland. I was hedging my bets on downtown Seattle, right? And so then when the guy goes, "Oh, Beirut, Lebanon," I'm like, "Oh, wow. Wow. At least they have something to riot about." Instead of just spoiled kids running around throwing rocks, because that's what we have now. I'm serious. And they're pulling out guns. I was laughing so hard. Did you see the whole black militia movement thingy? Where they were at Stone Mountain, Georgia?
I saw that.
It's like, man, any movement you're a part of, you take responsibility for it. Then when you come out as, "I'm the leader of this movement," blah, blah, then they come to find out there's a leaked video where they're getting paid to go out there. It's like, really? You had 3 people shot there, right? And it's like you're going into the heart of, everybody knows Stone Mountain, Georgia is the heart of Klan country.
I
As a
wanted to make
black man, I would never go.
I wanted to make a point about Seattle. What we're seeing now is Seattle is kind of a proving ground of sorts, or a test case for what you might see nationwide. You know, it started with this whole CHOP thing, the Chaz.
Oh yeah. Well, I went there personally.
Right. And it's from what I remember you telling me, it's not like it was portrayed on the news.
It wasn't. Oh my God, what a mess.
You know, a lot of the businesses there, they got vandalized. A lot of people that usually do business there, or, there's a lot of restaurants there that didn't get any business because all the customers were scared off by all the homeless people and all the armed members of that group, kind of scaring them away, so to speak. And so that neighborhood lost a lot of business, and I think they're currently suing the city for not protecting that area, because of these anarchists.
No, they are. There was an article this morning. There's a tea house that's leaving Seattle. They've been there for a long time. And so the owners were saying, well, or they were asking, the news was asking, are you closing because of the COVID? We know, customers have gotten hard to come by. And they were like, no, we're not closing because of COVID. We're closing because our customers don't want to come here and it's unsafe for our employees. So we're going to close down this branch. And so if you look, that's pretty much what you're going to have nationwide. No, you're right about the Seattle thing. Like I said, we're talking about moving the show. So you think millionaires are going to stay there? No, they're going to leave. They're not going to. I wouldn't stay. That's crazy. I would leave. But yeah, I would get out of there. I wouldn't stay. Who would stay in that mess? You have the money and the resources to get out of that place. Get out. And who are we going to tell? What are we going to tell them? Like the Ferrari dealership, completely busted open, and they had the security glass that's bulletproof and all that. And I guess it took them time to break those out, but they broke one of those out. But the Ferrari dealership was empty. It's boarded up. You go down there, even if where we live, if you go around, you look around the little city where we live, businesses are boarding up and closing. As soon as these Antifa and Black Lives Matter rallies moved in, people started moving out because your normal people are going to move out. So for me, I hope that the message they're trying to send is worth destroying communities. All righty, Dr. Fax, to segue back, we've often talked about society and discipline and consequences. I always say it's the one running theme through John Wick: consequences for your actions. So if you look at Seattle, Portland, and New York, and Austin, Texas is all places, right? It's Texas, what the hell? But Austin, Texas, they're liberal. And so liberal to me is not just a political view. It's a lifestyle. It's how you raise your kids. Even if your parents voted Democrat, like my father votes Democrat, I didn't grow up in a liberal household. It's a whole different lifestyle. There's going to be consequences for your actions. But so now I'm looking at Seattle, I'm looking at Portland, I'm looking at New York, I'm looking at Austin, and you have this whole generation of kids who've been raised without any consequences. And it's really bothersome because you see these kids out in the street and they're destroying stuff. You don't think there's going to be repercussions for trying to trap police in a building like they did in Portland and burn it down? Of course there's going to be consequences. What do you think about that, Dr. Fax?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is the end result of, the ability for kids to call CPS whenever their mom yells at them, or, the school calling protective services if if the kids' feelings got hurt at home. Kids are, for one reason or another, not disciplining their children and not telling them no. And so these kids are not learning what boundaries mean. And of course, it's getting them in trouble later on in life. They're getting in trouble with the law. When you live in a consequence-free environment for so long, your behaviors are gonna match that, and eventually you come across a situation where there's gonna be hell to pay, and they're surprised when they get pepper sprayed or body slammed or otherwise having limits imposed on their actions, and they're giving that shocked Pikachu face whenever they're breaking windows and stealing PlayStations, and they get arrested and charged with looting. And this wouldn't happen in a well-ordered society with conservative values where discipline is valued. Good manners are valued.
No, you're completely right. You're dead on the topic. Because even if you look now, and what really surprised me, the whole Portland situation when the wall of moms showed up, was really disgusting. They had shirts that said, "Stand behind me, this mom will protect you." Well, come to find out, they got sued by a Black organization down there. And pretty much what this organization said is, you're not for Black people. You're just making money. So I feel that's what's happening. People are getting rich off Black Lives Matter. And we're both men of color, right? Even though I do get accused of being an old white redneck, I am indeed a man of color. I just like my cowboy hats and my country music. But what you hit on was exactly right. Now they're going out into the world and dealing with consequences. And I don't know if you're subscribed to the Dan Dawson Show on YouTube or the Dan Dawson Show on Facebook, but I said the exact same thing in one of my videos yesterday, that they're going to go out there and meet up with people who are going to hand them consequences. There's going to be consequences for your actions. You're going to come across the wrong person, and there's going to be a very dire consequence. Even if we go back to the Austin, Texas thing, remember that where the protester got shot for pointing a rifle at somebody? He didn't think there would be consequences for him running around with a rifle. Right. He was a soldier, a veteran. I was like, what the hell are you thinking? I imagine he was probably a cook, though. I know he wasn't in the infantry. So for those of you that don't know, me and Dr. Fax both love infantry guys. We love the military. But so I know he wasn't in the infantry. Maybe he worked in PAC. I don't know. Turning down people's vacations.
Nice.
But yeah, they get out there and they don't think there's going to be any consequences for your actions. Then you're going to run across a person where when you threaten them or you're trying to pull somebody out of a car, like what's happening in Seattle, Portland, New York, Austin, there's going to be consequences. People ain't playing around out here. I don't know what they think it is. What's your opinion on the consequences that are about to come to these people, Dr. Fax?
Well, for one, I think that the increased lawlessness is going to make people reconsider, for one, their liberal outlook of the world. This might actually do more to turn people to conservatism than anything else in the long run. What we might see is actually over a period of years, Seattle turning from a solid blue city to a red city, something that I think people haven't really considered. When you see the effects of liberal policies and the ineffectiveness of them in the long term, you're going to see a demographic shift, I think, to the right. So I think that's going to be one of the unintended consequences of, increased lawlessness, defunding the police in a very large city, is people are going to, and like I said before, Seattle might be a test ground for newly formed militias and vigilantes.
Yeah, actually, that actually makes sense because think about it, right? I'm gonna call it the Carmen Best militia. When they rolled up in her neighborhood, those people weren't organized. They just came out to protect their neighbor. And when you have somebody as popular as Carmen Best as sheriff, as popular in the state as Carmen Best is, trying to stand up to the mayor and trying to stand up to these rioters, and then she gets ran out, that sends a message. It definitely sends a message. And the message is, if you're not with us, we're going to run you out. Well, guess what? Everybody's not going to run. Everybody's not going to run. It is what it is. People are going to stand tight, and I'm hoping people will stand up, stand tight. And if you'll notice now, the BLM protesters and the anti-FIFA, I know they're not a soccer league, but I just can't not say anti-FIFA. Because that's what I imagine them, a bunch of soccer soy boys running around kicking a ball. And they're kicking it down the street. Here's the problem. Now you're kicking that soccer ball down the street, and you kicked it onto the wrong neighbor's property. And you're not getting that soccer ball back without a fight. You know me, I don't stray away from violence. And I don't think any man should stray away from violence. And that's what we're getting. And you're giving them, these protesters are giving them the exact opportunity to do it. Because you're coming to their house, to their neighborhood. And with the castle doctrine, which most states have, if you're on your property and you're in your home, you don't have to back down. So those consequences are going to hit, and they're going to hit like Joe Rogan kicking a heavy bag. This is exactly what they're going to hit like. And I don't think anybody's taking this into consideration. I was talking to one of my nephews, and he's with the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's cute. Don't get killed out there. Don't get killed. Because you'll get in these big mobs. You know how it is. And then everybody gets to moving in one direction, and it's like, rah, 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 we're going to, take over this neighborhood, and we're going to show these people. But no, you can't just run over people like that. And I think a big part of it is also we've lost the ability to say, let me frame this. I got to frame this with a story. In 1993, yes, I'm that old, people. In 1993, I joined the Nation of Islam. So I'm at a barbecue. I was in the army then. I'm at a barbecue, and this old white man, I'm telling him about all these black things, right? And he goes, you know what? I don't agree with that. He goes, I don't agree with it, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And so he said that, and I'm telling you right now, Dr. Fax, I went back to the barracks, right, that night. Because you know how army parties are, you drink. So I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and for all these years since that old white guy said that to me in 1993, that remains a sticking point in my mind. The mere fact that he didn't agree with anything I said, but he still said, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. I think in society, we've kind of lost that point. Because now people want to control your thoughts and control your words. They want to hear their propaganda coming out of your mouth. And it's just not going to happen. There's going to be consequences for that. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And one thing you said that I was talking to a friend on, he called me, we were talking, right? And he goes, the state's about to turn red. He's a hardcore liberal. Hardcore, super hardcore, right? He's like, the state's going to turn red. This can't keep up. It's going to turn red. And I was like, no, it's not going to turn red. I mean, because this state, oh my God, so super liberal. I mean, you have, oh my God, hippies everywhere. But he said it's going to turn red. I'm like, no, it's not going to turn red. But I thought about that for a few days. And I'm like, maybe he's right. Maybe people are fed up because when you go to Seattle, which I've been, and there's needles and poop all in the street. You go to Olympia, which I've been, and you're having to go into, and this is before COVID, this is before the George Floyd BS, right? And this was 3 years ago, and you're having to step over homeless people to go into a store. Maybe they're gonna see it doesn't work. You have to give people a purpose. People just can't sit around all day and do nothing. But I just wanted to get your opinion, Dr. Fax, on what you think about, has the liberal agenda gotten to a point to where it can no longer survive?
Well, one thing I want to point out is that, for example, the state of California, the population has been growing since the 1800s nonstop. That trend has been reversed these last couple of years, and now you have more people emigrating from that state than you have people coming in. That statistic alone should tell you that people are pretty much fed up with the conditions over there and the policies in that state. And they're looking for opportunities elsewhere because it's just not working for a majority of people anymore. And you're starting to see that in a lot of the liberal coastal cities. People are leaving.
Well, and with the whole California thing, that's witnessed by, do you know they charge you 3 times as much if you're taking a U-Haul from California to Texas? And then they damn near pay you if you're driving from Texas to California. It's witnessed in the shrinking of the cities, these liberal cities. And what really worries me is that these people want to run to other cities, but they're taking their liberal ideas with them. Think about it, right? When everything hit with this COVID thing and society started breaking down, everybody went out and bought guns. But here's the problem. Those new gun owners are going to still vote liberal. They're still going to vote to have their own gun rights stripped. But it's like something we were referring to earlier. When society breaks down and you have to rely on yourself, you can't do it with a liberal mentality. It doesn't work. Now those new gun owners, gun sales amongst African Americans went up 86% during this strife. And the reason is these BLM people are going to Black neighborhoods, Black and Latino neighborhoods, and just destroying, right? So they want to protect themselves. Here's the thing. If you're going to do that, you can't continue to vote Democrat. I know we've kind of strayed off, but it all kind of ties back in. If you're going to continue to vote, I believe, Democrat, and you know me, I was a strong union guy back in the day, hardcore Democrat. You know, maybe I should post it in my Facebook page. Hey, I've had lunch and breakfast with Jay Inslee. I've called Jay Inslee on his personal cell phone. I've talked to his wife. You know, I have nothing against Democrats or liberals, but it's not sufficient in running the society. It's just, everything's not unicorns and rainbows. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. It's not. So, with all that being said, even I moved towards the right. Even I moved towards being a Trump supporter. Because if you look at the Democrat Party now with Joe Biden and Francis O'Rourke, their number one issue is to take your ability to defend yourself away from you. Like with the whole thing because for me, I know we've kind of strayed into the Second Amendment here, which I usually stray into. The whole thing with, why do you need a 30-round magazine? And my thing was always, what if 15 Klansmen show up on my excuse my language, show up on my lawn? I'm going to need that 30-round magazine. Now, think about how crazy this is, right? I'm not saying what if 15 Klansmen show up on my lawn. I'm saying what if 150 BLM people show up on my lawn? And yes, my lawn is big enough to support that. We make a lot of money here at the show, so. But what if 150 BLM members show up on my lawn to take down my beautiful, beautiful red, white, and blue?
Yeah, you're going to need as much protection as you can muster.
Yeah, and so the scary part is, do you think that now other normal citizens, and I say normal because I'm a competitive shooter. I love shooting. I love guns. I'm from Texas. We don't have a choice. We love our guns, except for in Austin. I don't know what the hell is going on in Austin. I think that's where all the California people went. Also notice, right, it's where Joe Rogan went. He went to Austin. So not calling out Joe Rogan. I'm just saying, because I know he loves his guns. He loves his hunting. Man's man. But I'm older than Joe Rogan. I still kick his ass. Anyway, the whole issue is now you're moving to our cities and turning us. But yeah, so no, it's people like that are coming into these conservative cities. Just don't bring your liberal ideas with you because you left because it doesn't work. I was telling one of my good friends, who I've known for years, right? Matter of fact, we used to do the nasty together. So I was telling her, she was like, oh yeah, she's always super liberal. I'm like, but you moved to Florida, a red state. So you're down there with your liberal ideas. And you see, they don't work. If they worked, you wouldn't have left. It's just, I don't know. It's just ridiculous to me. What do you think about the overall? I don't think liberals, one, are going to work well in the country. I grew up in the country. They better learn to ride horses and castrate cows.
Well, here's the thing, is as I see it, political thought, I think, is structured differently in cities versus rural, because when you live in a rural community, you're basically forced to rely on your resources to get by, yours and your family. And that's not necessarily the case, in a big city, because you have all these social services that you could rely on and you get used to. And a lot of those self-sufficiency skills atrophy. And so your line of thought goes that all your needs should be taken care of by the state because they do it anyway, because of all the utilities that a big city is able to provide. And, in a small town or in a small out of nowhere place in rural America, you don't have those resources to tap into. So you're going to have more of an individualist philosophy, a more conservative approach to life. And to me, that makes sense, because it's two different realities coexisting,
I completely agree with that. I was talking to one of my liberal friends about racism. It's like, well, I grew up in a small town. And when you grow up in a small town, everybody's reliant on each other. So you don't see that much racism. And if you do, it's pretty much kept in the house. You don't take it outside the front door because you never know if you're going to need that black family's mess of cucumbers later on down the street. Or if you're going to need some meat off one of their cows or hogs that's slaughtered. But no, I agree with that. I like where you went with that. I don't think in a small community racism is as prevalent unless one of the people in that small community is well off and doesn't have to rely on anybody. Other than that, I still think I could take Joe Rogan. I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying. He went with the whole ball look and everything, but hey. But people like Joe Rogan and like I said, I think Joe Rogan would do well in Texas. He's a hunter. He loves Texas. So all we need to do now is get him a Texas flag and a Texas patch. He's in there. But the liberals who are moving to these conservative states and running away from their problems, well, it's like being in a relationship. You can't take your problems from one relationship to the other relationship because you're going to get the same result. And that's exactly what is happening right now. The liberals are running from Washington State, Oregon State, New York, and they're running to places like Florida, Texas, Arizona, Idaho, right? Utah. But they're taking the same problems and the same voting mentality. Well, here's the thing. If it didn't work there, it's probably not going to work here. So when you leave it there, realize you made a mistake. Realize you made a mistake. Realize that, yeah, you voted wrong, that, yeah, your mentality was wrong. Because if not, you wouldn't be moving into these other neighborhoods. So, all righty. Thank you, Dr. Fax, for being a guest on the Dan Dawson Show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we appreciate your input. You know the deal. The invitation is always extended. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up and end it. I'll tell you, these liberals need to stay where the hell they are. Vote your way out of your problems. That's my thought on it. So thank you, audience, for listening to the Dan Dawson Show today. I greatly appreciate your attendance.